What's up, Magic players? Coming at you with another Death Shadow video. So, if you don't know, I think Murders at Karlov Manor, whatever the name of this set is. I know there's been a lot of memes going around about it. Set just released on Magic Online, like yesterday, something like that. So we're gonna have some videos coming out in the near future, trying out some of the new cards in Death Shadow variant. Also have a video should be coming out the next day or two about cards that I'm planning on trying out, like why I'm planning to try them out, what they could possibly do for me that I'm interested in. So be looking forward to that. I have like a full list, hard to see, but like a full list of cards to go over. But we'll get to that at another time. This was a league that I ran through like right before the set dropped. Usually I go into a bit of a lull when a new set's getting ready to come out because like things are going to be changing. New cards are going to be introduced in the format. Things that have been played aren't going to be played as much, as they either get replaced or upgraded or side graded, whatever the case may be. Decks fall in and out of favor. So I always feel like that data you collect right before a set releases useful in the world. We also have RC Denver coming up this weekend, so that'll shift things around a little bit. But when I'm in like a lull period, I'm not really sure what to do, what I want to try out. Jund Shadow's like my go-to. I always feel like it's very consistent variant of Shadow, really good at punishing people stumbling, and I like that. I like that proactivity. So going through a Jund Shadow League here, just showcase some of the stuff that's going on, some of the recent changes I've been trying out, see if anything better or worse than it has in the last few months. The big change, I think, is this really heavy prevalence of Yawgmoth right now. So you'll see like 4 Dolphy Voidwalker on the side, a couple totems, just to try to fight like that matchup almost exclusively, while also having Dolphy as a good value piece into like Living In and Rhinos and Tron, Amulet Titan, all those things. The main deck, pretty consistent with what I've been running for the better part of the last year. Shadow, Goyf, Seas, Rag, Kroxa, Fable. I really like the Kroxa Fable package. I think it's something that not a lot of people have really bought into, but it's done a really good job for me at being a combination of cards that are really good at beating anything fair. So like opposing scam decks, mURktide, other shadow decks, white control, anything like that. I feel like that 5-card package carries a lot of weight in those games. So it's something that I'm especially interested in continuing to run. The big question that always comes about with Jund is the green worth it? Tarmogoyf, Terra Sunder, Veil of Summer, cards like that. To me, it absolutely is. I think that the consistency that Goyf brings, proactive 2-drop, that doesn't cause you, in the case of things like Inti, to not be able to attack into Rhinos or like Wall of Root, stuff like that. Or in the case of Souls of the Lost, doesn't cause you to sack something or ditch a card, is a pretty big deal. The green mana is not really much of a hindrance with so many fetches, and the fact that you can just easily play like a Stomping Ground, a Overgrown Tomb, and kind of be set. Really, red black splash that tiny little green instead of being like a gun build, red and 6 and Bloodbraid and stuff like that. Terra Sunder also, I think, is one of the more flexible, versatile interactive spells, in my opinion. Hitting One Ring, hitting Leyline Binding, hitting Soul Cauldron, kick it on a mURktide, a whole bunch of stuff that you can take out very, very efficiently. The only other things I did try out for a little bit, going like heavy on the artifact hate in the side, like 3 Chalice, 3 EE, 3 Curse Totem, a Pithing Needle. And I don't hate that. It's you can make it a little bit better if you want to keep in Giganta post board, but I found more and more that like a lot of the matchups that I want, something like Dolphy or Chalice or whatever, I just don't care about Giganta at all. So a lot of the times, my sideboard hate pieces were skewed towards keeping Giganta previously. Now I'm more in line with, hey, I'll have Giganta game one, and if I give it up game two for some really good hate pieces, okay with that. So let's go ahead and jump in, showcase some of the games here, and yeah, maybe inspire you to play some Jund Shadow. Not okay too. Round number one on the draw. Always hate being on the draw in Modern. Such a ridiculously play draw dependent format. Opponent leads on a Misty, so immediately I'm thinking some sort of Cascade deck. I could lead on Ragavan, but I don't really want to lead Ragavan into like an end of turn Dead Gone or Untap Fire and Ice, something like that. But instead, we Thoughtseize, take a Violent Outburst, leave him with a Shardless Agent and a couple land cyclers. So pretty seize proof hand on their side. Pause real quick. So it doesn't really matter if I take one or the other of the Cascade effects. They're going to have one on turn 3. They only have one land in their opener, but with double int, we know they're going to be able to find the other two. Then going into my turn 2 here, I decided to dash the Ragavan instead of going for Waif, because there's always the chance they've got a living end off the top that I saw with a bobble, so I know they have one in hand. If they draw a second one, maybe Ragavan exiles over a third. Chance they just have no more ends. If I play out the Goyf, then even if they draw another living, they have a third copy with Shardless Agent Cascade, so I know they'll have. So Ragavan here is just all little percent being able to cheese out all the copies. Realistically, I don't expect it to. It gives me more of a percent chance than hard casting the Goyf. Does in fact go for the agent on 3. We untap. We could play out double Goy. Not enough to save us, so go to game number 2. Sideboarding. Taking out a bunch of these spot removal spells, heat, terminate, keeping in the bolts because they can go upstairs. Bringing in Dolphys, bring Chalice of the Void, Teamer Battle Rage. Out it. Think that like the blue variants having access to Flusterstorm a lot more. Not playing. Got to do. Case that's getting down a Dolphy and hoping. Pretty reactive hand for artifact and enchantment hate with luckily not a lot of interaction. Dolphy. It is important to keep up keep up with how like the Dolphy interaction works. If you haven't played it before, the way that this cycle goes is if you have a Dolphy and your opponent cycles stuff into it, exiled great. If they cast a Cascade spell, do not want the Cascade spell to resolve with the Dolphy on the battlefield. Kind of think like, oh, it exiles the Cascade spell, exiles Living In. No, not. The way Living In is worded, everything on the battlefield gets sacked. Everything in the graveyard gets exiled. Everything on the battlefield gets sacked. Everything exile comes back to the battlefield. So that Living In doesn't actually go to the graveyard until it's finished resolving, at which point Dolphy would be sacked and in the graveyard. But if you sacrifice the Dolphy in response, target whatever. If you can cast it, great. If you can't cast it, great. Sack the Dolphin in response to the living end, not the Cascade spell, not the Cascade trigger, the actual living end. You want to make sure they put the living. Sack the Dolphin in response. The living end resolves. Dolphin goes to exile. If your board gets sacked, Dolphin comes back to the battlefield, and then the living end finishes resolving and would go to the graveyard, get exiled with Dolphin. And if you go to your next turn where you no longer have a Dolphy with summoning sickness, you can sack the Dolphy, target the living end, and essentially reset the entire thing. Put all the creatures that your opponent brought back into the graveyard, because you put that Dolphy in the graveyard to sack it to the living end or cast their living end. You get the Dolphy back. So it kind of works to be able to repeat itself. And most importantly, when you sack the Dolphy to cast the living end, and then you cast the living end, you get the Dolphy back, it exiles the living end again. So if you need to cast it again, you can. Talking. So, opponent does not have, at least at the moment, we don't think they have a Cascade spell. I do have a pretty quick clock going on. It is important, though, in these situations to not attack with the Dolphy, because one of the ways your opponent can very easily get out of this is by end of turn Violent Outburst. If you attack with the Dolphy or untap Shardless Agent, and you don't get to get that Dolphy into the yard before it resolves. Here, opponent goes for the Outburst. Sack the Dolphy in response to the living end. Get back the Dolphy once the living end resolves. Bolt off a creature. Get their Waker. So we sacked the Dolphy targeting their Waker. And got back the Dolphy off the living end. Cast their Waker afterwards. We have to wait for our Dolphy to not have summoning sickness. But kind of okay with that if we do get to have a new Dolphy. Have board. You know what I mean. So here's sacking the Dolphy, recasting the living end, resetting everything. I wish I could have gotten away in this game without showing them the Chalice, because they brought in all of these Force of Vigors and Foundation Breakers and stuff like that. And if I could have won that game only showing them Dolphy, then maybe they would board that stuff out going into game 3, and it gave me a better chance of winning with a Chalice game 3. But I had to show them the Chalice, because if they did just top deck another Cascade spell, especially a Violent Outburst, I was in a lot of trouble. Opponent molds to 4 or 5 here. Baker, a couple Cascade spells, but Chalice. Now they've got to find Foundation Breaker. Get this Goyf down. We're going to have a fairly quick clock. Okay with Kroxa here, because if our opponent did top deck a Force of Vigor, they're going to have to discard either Force or one of their green cards, which means they want to get rid of the Chalice. They got to ditch the other Cascade spell, and it just becomes a top deck raid. Either way, we should have this one kind of wrapped up with quick Goyf, Chalice. Yeah, that's definitely the power of Goyf, is just getting a proactive threat down that ends the game pretty quickly. Match number 2. Full hand on the plate. Thoughtseize into Kroxa. Get some stuff in the yard. Against 8 rack. Not want to expect to see all that often. Top decks of Thoughtseize. I'm kind of surprised they went for the Thoughtseize instead of an Inquisition that I knew about. Doesn't like really matter, but Saga is really for me. Top deck sees into Saga. Solid for our opponent there. Do have a construct covered with this Unholy Heat and reasonable amount of removal spells that might let us cover a second construct. Got the here just to keep our card count up. The goal here is I just want to get towards Kroxa. I know it's a pretty decent top deck. Ditch the Blood Chief's Thirst out of hand. So now opponent's empty-handed. We have the ability to get back Kroxa if we want. But it doesn't really make a lot of sense to get back Kroxa into like this known Liliana. That just nukes our entire graveyard for a bolt. I was planning on just unholy hitting the Liliana. Instead, we top deck Ragavan, so now hit them and unholy heat the Liliana. Ragavan's also such a phenomenal threat against the rack because, hey, we get to dash in, get some damage, get a treasure. This should have been a pretty big indicator. Opponent could have made a construct and chose not to. So like a 3/3 construct into Ragavan would be pretty good, right? But they chose not to make the construct. So my assumption is they had to have drawn something to deal with the Ragavan. Turns out Fatal Push. I was kind of thinking it was going to be a Bowmaster, but found Fatal Push. Take out the Kroxa on this escape, but I do get to keep my card count up pretty high. I want to play out. I want to play out my fourth land at some point, but I really don't want to play out any more than the extra lands. Kind of just get to hang out in hand. And if I get to make my mana off Ragavan hits, then that's all the more reason to play out the lands. Seas is okay-ish. Another card I can keep in hand to not have to do anything to the rack. Find a Liliana. So I decided to just like play out the Liliana to have, mostly because there's always the chance that our opponent plays something like Gothy, some threat like that I might want Liliana hanging around to Edict. I don't like giving up a card in hand to play that land drop, but like I said, kind of taking the approach of reasonable chances Liliana does something at some point, maybe tick up to get a removal spell out of hand to save the Kroxa, whatever the case may be. Finding K command here is absolutely fun. The one of K command really showing through. So now we get to draw step, blow up one of these racks, make them discard. Should be not necessarily cruising from here, in an okay spot. One copy of the rack. We've got Ragavan. Now, really what I should have done here is play out the bauble, sack it on them, see if it's something I care about them drawing or not, and potentially just hard casting the Ragavan. But I don't think it's too much of a concern either way. Like dashing the Ragavan does make life a little bit better against like this Wrench Mind. I do just get to have more cards in hand, makes the rack less effective. And also plays into Kroxa pretty nicely. Yes, I did miss lethal here. I could have end of turn bolted, untapped. They'd be at 4, dash Ragavan to 2. With the treasure I make, I give myself exactly enough mana to escape Kroxa for the final 3. So that is something that I could have noticed sooner. I was kind of like in that mindset of don't cast cards if I don't have to. Don't throw away the bolt. But yeah, did just have lethal. Yeah. Go start. Usually 8 rack, not quite the deck I expect to run into in the modern league. Or no, that's game 1. This is game 2. I did think about boarding in Giganta. Thought really hard, or not boarding in Giganta, boarding in Dolphy and losing Giganta just to have a higher threat density. But I decided that Giganta being essentially like draw a card against 8 rack was a little bit more useful. So being able to add that Giganta to hand at some point, give me an extra card. Then I thought this was kind of funny. So we go fetch, fetch up our green source, and they Pithing Needle named Bloodstained Mire, which normally could be kind of awkward with Shadow or mana production in general. But when your opponent has so graciously played an Urborg for you, now this Bloodstained Mire still taps for mana. That's pretty nice. Like freely ditch the Shadow because hey, I'm not getting my life total low enough to cast it unless I double bolt myself. And I don't want to double bolt myself and then play out a Shadow just for my opponent to edict it. We'll take them being down to 1 card in hand. We get to resolve a Fable. They have a removal spell for our token. That's fine. Kind of just digging towards Kroxa or finding the mana to play out Giganta, something like Bitter Triumph. Decide to take 3 instead of ditch their last card. So I feel pretty confident that their last card's probably a removal spell. All pox. Okay, with us, we do end up finding the Kroxa. I would not fault you that last turn for keeping Bowmaster and just discarding the bolt. I think that would be completely reasonable. For me, I kind of figured like if I find a land, I'm closer to Kroxa. If I find a Goyf or any other threat, like I'm closer to getting my head. Or Fables would be great. So I didn't really feel like, oh, I have to have Bowmaster. Kind of that situation if I feel any top deck is good and Bowmaster's like on the lower end of good, Ragavan would have been good. So like we found was phenomenal. Kind of assuming opponents again got another removal spell if they're not doing anything. They could have a 3-drop, could just be like regardless, we're just gonna sit here and keep escaping Croak. Blood Chief's Thirst couldn't kill the reflection on their turn. Sorcery speed, so they're not dealing with Croak's. That is all she wrote for Smallpox. 8 rack or 8 pox or pox rack. Technical term for the deck is nowadays. Talk mulligan decisions. No red mana. Turn 1 Ragavan. We are on the play, so like turn 1 Goyf or turn 1 Bobble, turn 2 Goyf isn't the worst thing in the world. But no fetch land, no Thoughtseize, no interaction. I kind of means I want to throw it back. It's like not that far off from a keepable hand, but there are some key, uh, key lacking pieces there. The second hand here, pretty good. I think I end up just ditching a second copy of Thoughtseize. No, end up ditching the Bauble because I want a play on turn 1, play on turn 2, play on turn 3 with Fable. If I kept the Bauble, there wasn't a guarantee that I had a play on turn 2. So decided to throw it back. Turn 1, Thoughtseize. This was a tricky one. So obviously seeing double Ragavan really sucks because, hey, I don't have a removal spell for that second Ragavan. Chandler's a little less exciting. I think my best bet is take a Ragavan, hope I top deck either a removal spell for the second Ragavan or something like a stand in front of it. So that's what I end up doing. Opponent kept a 1-lander with the double rag. So if I can find an answer to this rag, I've got a pretty... and then this, again, it's okay. So I'm playing odds here. The odds are I can Thoughtseize and take the Unholy Heat, play out Ragavan, then just like stand in front of their Ragavan, threaten to trade. That's pretty good for me. Option number 2 is dash Ragavan and hope that either they trade or I hit a removal spell off the top of their library. If I don't, then I don't get to do anything else this turn. Just that. 2 damage. They get to hit with the Ragavan, start fixing their mana. That's pretty bad for me. Option number 3 would be Thoughtseize, take like expressive iteration, play my Ragavan, and they'll get to Unholy Heat my Ragavan, but at least like I take away the best card out of their hand. I end up going for the Thoughtseize, take the Spell Pierce because frame perfect pause here. They drew another Unholy Heat, which was absolute worst case scenario for me. I was planning on taking the Unholy Heat, playing out my Ragavan because I didn't want to dash my Ragavan and then have them just like not do anything, not block. I don't get another play and they get to hit me with Ragavan on the way back and fix their mana. So they rip second Unholy Heat, which means now my plan is just like play Rag, let it die. Next turn, play Fable, let it the token die. Just a better way of putting it. Yeah, now with the double Unholy Heat, they've just like fixed all of their mana problems, and they ended up hitting the land. Get heat, they get iteration, play their channeler. I could play out a Goyf here, but I'm taking 3 in the air, staring down the channeler with no way of dealing with it. They just iteration, so they're going to have another card in hand. Either way, on to game 2. You could sideboard in Dalthy. I really don't like Dalthy against mURktide because 1, it dies to every removal spell that they have. 2, it doesn't do anything against like a dashed Ragavan. And a lot of times it's like a little too slow. Not clocking your opponent that well. All right, so I wanted to make sure that I Bowmastered on my turn to play around like them having land counter spell. As soon as they go for a main phase preordain, probably game over as far as Bowmaster is concerned. I was hoping that they would not think about Bowmaster and like I'd fetch and then they would bobble after I fetched or something. But they didn't, and I didn't want to pass the turn without playing Bowmaster just in case they didn't crack the bobble. Decided to like wait for removal spell. Either way, sideboarding against mURktide, even though game 2 is like already over. Typically looking towards bringing in ways to kill mURktide. It's more about play patterns against mURktide really than it is about sideboarding. Like, don't leave yourself susceptible to Blood Moon. Try to get Bowmaster value when you can. Don't put yourself in positions to get 1-for-1 if you can. So, like, not playing Ragavan into an open fiery islet where any red removal spell can take it out. Waiting until Goyf is big enough to dodge Stern Scolding to play it. Things like that. My opponent gave me a window here to resolve Bowmaster because they went for the expressive iteration. Gonna take that opportunity. Doesn't really matter if it's not like getting insane extra value. It's just not playing into counterspell, not giving my opponent the opportunity to 1-for-1 me there. Back in, K command for lethal. Woo. Yeah, pretty quick 3-0. As we all know, when you have a league that's going pretty well and the gears are turning efficiently, that's usually when you just get like slapped in the face. Absolute backhanded by life, by Magic Online. So probably take some guesses, foreshadowing into what's about to happen. Turn 1 Young Wolf, like worst thing we can possibly see when we're sitting on a hand with Ragavan and 1 land. So instead of going for the Ragavan, we'll just go for the bobble, try to make sure we hit the second land drop. Really hoping that our opponent would attack with that wolf so we could dash in Ragavan, but they do not. Instead, we'll take this opportunity to kill off the young wolf. I hate so incredibly much. Tearing down a soul cauldron, like 4-drop with a cord in the land. We know they're going to get to play out a Yawgmoth next turn. Kind of hoping that I can put enough pressure on to attack through before they're able to. Gears turning. Back in with the Shadow, because even if they block, put a counter on it, I can still trade Shadow and Unholy Heat for the Yawgmoth, which isn't great. Don't get me wrong. And this was brutal. Having the Colony Garden to make a dude, the Lighted Halfling, and the cord for 2 into the Patra while I'm tapped out. That hurt my soul. That cut me deep. Sideboarding against Yawgmoth. I do really think this matchup is like absolutely a bit. But boarding out Ragavans, boarding out a Fable because it's a little slow. Or boarding out a couple Thought Seizes because Veil of Summer is a thing, and because like stripping 1 card in a deck that's so repetitive really doesn't do that much. Hoping Dolthy, hoping First Totem, that stuff can kind of carry me. Do want to make sure that if you've got Dolthy out, be pretty proactive about getting things off the board. Like, don't sit around and try to wait for a combo turn. If you can get value by killing off an Undying dude early or killing off some value piece early, do it. Uh, if you don't, you run this risk of like your opponent building up enough guys to where they can just start courting in response to remove spells or something like that. Like here, my opponent's got an obvious quarter calling. 4 mana, 3 dudes, cord for 4, bodies around. All we're trying to do is get enough pressure going to where when they do go for this cord and it kind of forces the action, then I can just finish them off. In case of Bowmaster thing and a lightning bolt, make them sack off most of their board dealing with the Dolphy. But that was more fortune than anything. Like them not having a grist on turn. Probably go over that again. So I do really think this is a trap hand. See like Bowmasters and Shadow and think that it's got some play to it, but with the fetch shock, the second shock, and the Thoughtseize, I'm only getting down to 13. So like the Shadow's not even live based off my hand right now, unless I'm Bowmaster pinging myself. Bowmaster not even that great in the matchup once they get Soul Cauldron, never pinging off anything. And then the fact that they're no longer playing like Ignoble Hierarch and Birds of Paradise and stuff like that means that you're not pinging off their mana dork. So Bowmaster's kind of like this value piece that you want to be able to take out like a fetched up Dryad Arbor, opposing Bowmaster, uh, Blood Artist, stuff like that. But it's not a central piece to your winning game plan. Like your winning game plan needs to be Shadow or Goyf, get a bunch of pressure early, and start getting their life total down pretty low so they can't go crazy with the Yawgmoth. Then maybe like they get a Yawg down, you flash in a Bowmaster, and you're able to start getting a couple extra pings to keep them from kind of comboing off on. That's where Bowmaster shines. Bowmaster playing out like right there. Dryad Arbor is one of the few cards that Bowmaster can straight up kill, but once they get a Soul Cauldron going, not doing anything. Halfling because I need to get pressure going, even if it's just 2 points a turn. It's better than nothing. Not exciting. It's not flashy. Again, I do not want to terminate a wall of room, but 2 points a turn is a lot faster of a clock than one. Obviously, opponent finding a Bowmaster kind of that clock out the window. But this really does go to show that cards like Curse Totem are a good start to the disruption. But if you don't have like the Goyf or the Shadow or something, the Dolphy, whatever, to back up that Curse Totem, it's not going to be enough. Soul Cauldron. And do I hate? I'm not looking forward to Yawgmoth with like new Deus Root, whatever. Good play by my opponent here. Attacking with a Shadow, they force the fetch with the triple block, then have the fatal push anyway, so they just get like the damage on me there. But I can't not attack. Like I'm not accomplishing anything by not attacking. But here I'm just dead to the attack plus the. On to match number 5. R3-1 though, so like pretty good league for the most. Obviously, I prefer 4-0, but always have everything. Then what would a modern league be if you didn't get to end it on island off the top of their library? I could go for the turn 1 Ragavan. I'd rather get the Thoughtseize down here because if they do have double cascade spells, then I give myself the chance to top deck like another Thoughtseize next turn, play out Ragavan. But they do just have Force and Negation for Thoughtseize, which means probably just like need Tarmogoyf. Thoughtseize instead of playing the Ragavan for that exact reason. Being able to snipe a cascade spell instead of just letting my Ragavan. Rag for some chip damage. You have a Goyf that's bigger than a Rhino currently. Find some more interaction. Maybe there's something there. And it's gonna have some Rhinos coming off suspend next turn. Yeah. Funnest time in the world, but we do have a Peatland to crack. Unholy Heat. We don't have Delirium, but we do have the ever fun play of play a Ragavan, dash a second Ragavan, sack the first one to give ourselves Delirium, and attack in. If our opponent double blocks our Goyf, we can Unholy Heat a Rhino. That they double block in on the Ragavans. Play our Shadow and pass, and they top deck. Go from being in an okay spot to just being dead. Realistically, I should have continued on with that game and made them attack with all of their Rhinos. Because if they attacked with 3, then I could block 1, heat 1, take 4, still be alive, and have attack on the crackback. But I don't think there's any reason for them to not just right-click attack all. Sideboarding. Sideboarding for the most part is like really similar to sideboarding against Living End. Like you're boarding in all the chalices, boarding in the Dolthies. In this case, we're boarding in the EE, taking out a lot of the bolts because they never kill a Rhino, but Heat can kill a Rhino, and it's better against like mURktide. Then boarding out the Bowmasters because me paying 2 mana for 2 1/1s is a lot worse than my opponent paying 3 mana for 2 4/4. Occasionally, you'll have moments where you like Bowmaster in response to a Flame of Anor or a hardcast Lorien reveal. Oh, this is great. This is fantastic. Happens so few and far between that I do not think it is worth it trying to make it consistent. I could hardcast the Chalice here. I'd elect to not play it out yet for 2 reasons. One, I want to use the Chalice as late as possible to give my opponent the fewest opportunity windows to like Besage you it or Force a Vigor it or something like that. 2, I want to give myself the most chances of top decking a hand disruption spell to protect it by being able to Thoughtseize and then go for like the Chalice. And as a small side note, there is a little bit of trying to decide if I want to use the Chalice to bait for the Dolthy or the Dolthy to bait for the Chalice. Because if my opponent has a Subtlety, a Force, and a blue card, maybe if they Subtlety the Dolthy, then they have to give up on countering the Chalice, something like that. So there is some consideration for that. Goes for the ice. try to get down Dolthy. They did have the subtlety and the blue. Went for the chalice before combat to try to bait force a negation because it would end up growing the Tarmogoyf. Dolthy post combat was poor because I have much to do. I could have gone for Dolthy pre combat to try to get subtlety. That would grow the Goyf. Probably should have done that. Trade off Goyf and Unholy Heat for mURktide, but end up hitting my opponent's mURktide. So, hey, one way or the other, I'd staying around on the battlefield. Expected it to. Make the attack in with both, because if they do have another subtlety to flash in, I'm completely okay trading off Ragavan and Heat subtlety, like playing another Ragavan. Base. I think this is Rag that reveals an outburst. Reveal an outburst. Well, of course I'm going to cast it, because why not? Unfortunately, Terminate, not really it that we want. Could cast it just to try to improve the odds for Delirium. Sounds pretty good. But it has a pretty sweet turn here. So they Otawara their own mURktide to get it back into hand, cast Footfalls into the Chalice, and then end up casting a Violent Outburst and another Footfalls into the Chalice just to make this mURktide that they bounce that much bigger. So I did think that was pretty sweet on their part. Thumbs up from me. Down to one card. Rag and a Shaman token. If we attack next turn with both and our opponent blocks the Ragavan, we do just give ourselves the chance to like dash another Ragavan for lethal the turn after. Speedily deciding to go for the and cast a Death Shadow pre-combat there. I should have waited. I should have attacked and then cast the Shadow post-combat. So if my opponent had a subtlety, they wouldn't get like the free value right there by putting my Shadow back on top and having the chance to block. That was pretty bad on my part. Then this is me kind of taking the approach of, okay, I'll just keep attacking and they're going to have to find some piece of interaction every turn. Which to an extent they did. Thankfully, we came out on top by finding one more piece of interaction. Thoughtseize, check for a force negation. Holy Heat the Agent, have a lethal reflection coming in. So, our one more piece of interaction. Very nice. Very clutch. Game 3. Oh, I hate fair hands against Rhinos. Like, Thoughtseize into Goyf looks so good, but not having like Chalice of the Void into Goyf or something is a pretty big bummer. But they really kept a very fair hand too. So we see double Fire Ice, Subtlety, Dismember, and a Dead and Gone. I ended up taking one of the Fire and Ices just to try to cut down on the draws a bit. If they decide to like Subtlety the Tarmogoyf, I get 2 more cards out of hand for not a big loss. I'm pretty sure this was going for the Bowmaster, so that I could shut off ice on my up or make like ice on my upkeep not as impactful. And they ended up subtleting the Bowmaster instead. So I just like threw it on the bottom. So yeah, you got it. I'll go with this Fable plan, get Croxa into the yard. Way better. Escape said Croaks. Good play out of Shadow. Big draw to playing out a 1/1 Shadow here. Just deploy the Goon Squad. Back in with the Croxa. Get card out of hand. Get a Rhino off the battlefield. This Rhino coming off suspend here means that the first Dolthy gets to exile Crashing Footfalls. Now we just get to like chain off our own Rhinos into their Rhinos. Super fun and awesome and closer to escaping Croxa again. Terminator Rhino, and they end up scooping to that because, hey, we got all the Rhinos and the Croxa, and they don't. Yeah. Side note, that's why you bring in Dolthy against Rhinos, because the best way to counter them having 2/4/4 tramplers is self 2/4. Or it's one of the best ways. Best way to counter is Chalice of the Void actually says counter for Rhinos. Anyway, yes, that was a Jund Shadow League. Pretty nice, pretty fun. I still think, just like I said in the match, and I'll continue to say, Yawgmoth is abysmal. I have not found a good game plan against that deck. If you have something that's working for you, I would love to hear it, regardless of the color combination. Like, I think Yawgmoth is so popular and so prevalent and so bad of a matchup that it's probably worth splashing a fourth color for a card that can like solo Yawgmoth. If it actually solos Yawgmoth, just something that's like marginally better, like, oh, drop something for Prismatic Ending. If Prismatic Ending like actually solos Yawgmoth, that's probably worth it. But if it's like splash blue for Stern Scolding, and Stern Scolding's like pretty good but doesn't solo Yawgmoth, then I don't think that's worth it. Maybe Prismatic Ending is something worth trying out. Deal with Grist, deal with the Soul Cauldron, deal with any of the threats. Maybe could be an idea. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you leave your thoughts down below so we can know what working for you. Other than that, link to the deck list down below. Link to the Twitter in case you want to catch a live stream, place that gets updated. The Twitch and the Discord in case you say hey, talk shadow, talk non-shadow, anything else that's going on. Otherwise, hope everybody has a fantastic rest of the day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. I will catch y'all back live later. Cheers for now.